I think hope is something that keeps us alive, especially in my case, So I see something that is missing out. So I feel responsibility. Somebody has to, I cannot expect somebody to come in my area and protect our biodiversity or motivate people. It has to be from within us. So I really believe, this is not just the job, it's the responsibility that we should carry forward, no matter whether we get credit or not.
Hi, I'm Adam Vaughan, Environment Editor at The Times. Today we're travelling to the Himalayas, albeit virtually, to meet someone working on one of the most remote and ambitious conservation efforts on Earth. Rinzin Phunjok Lama grew up in the mountains of Humla in northwestern Nepal. Now he's helping protect endangered wildlife and sacred landscapes, all while empowering the local communities who call this extraordinary place home. Rinzin, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Adam.
Rinzin, just describe for people what Humla is like. What if I was there, what would it, look like, sound like, feel like? Give people a sense of it.
So Humla is a very diverse region, I will say in that way. It's a trans-Himalayan regions. That means it's basically located behind the main Himalayan ranges. And Humla is bordering Tibet Autonomous Region of China. So we have a very diverse habitat, the Great Tibetan Plateau in the north and deep gorges in the south, the deep ravine and gorges in the south. So this diversity this landscape gives unique diversity in the form of rich wildlife, vegetation, etc. So in the northern sides, we have the plateau species like wild egg, Tibetan gazelle, Kiang, or Gali, and if we come down in the deep ravine, dominated by upper temperate forests, we have species like leopard, Himalayan black bear, mox deer, and where most of the cultural landscapes are located. So it's a mix of rich natural and cultural heritage.
So it's quite a place of contrast. It sounds like. Is it relatively hard to get to as well as for humans? What's it like to, what you grew up there? What's it like? What was it like growing up there?
Yes, geographically it's quite isolated. Yeah, so it's a different world in itself. When I grew up, it used to be a different world for ourselves. So basically, in those days, when I was growing up, we don't have much connection with other villages within the region. It was quite geographical isolated, and in terms of connection, also there were not much interactions between different villages in Humla.
Got you. I see what you mean. And when you were a child, what were the sort of stories that were told about, the land, the mountains? You mentioned some of the wildlife that lives there. What were the sort of, obviously these things often end up very embedded in culture, right? What were some of the stories that were told?
So I think there used to be lots of stories, especially in the winter. There used to be heavy snowfall for almost 3-4 months in the winter in those days when I was growing up as a kid. And so in those times, we don't have much activities to do. Most of the people are staying at home, and winter used to be a really time for children to listen to these folklore stories, and most of them stories are about super animal. We call it super animal because it's about mostly the stories were connected to wildlife and people, wildlife manifesting into people, wildlife manifesting into super beings, stuff like that. So among the stories, one of them was about the tale of the snow leopard. And in the winter, so when all the family member gathers, we hear that, okay, snow leopard kill livestock. And in those times, like I used to imagine snow leopard might be some fierce or giant monster, that is capable of killing. That was really a source of curiosity. And like one day my grandmom, one day I asked, and I heard from my grandmom that she told a different version of the story that snow leopard are the deity. They are like the deity. So before venturing into the summer pastures or high alpine meadows, one should praise the deity, offering prayers, and if someone ignores, the deity manifests in the form of a snow leopard and kills livestock. And if someone further provokes or ignore, the deity can bring more harm to both life and livestock, and even can bring natural disasters. So this was the notion that I still remember from that childhood, and that really have a deep impression on me for a long time.
That's really interesting. So is this an older pot sort of? I'm trying to think what the like European analogy would be. It sounds like it occupies a sort of similar places like the wolf, stories like Red Riding Hood over here, like in folklore. Okay. And you mentioned that was that story, the grandmother talking about the Snollypot as a deity made you think differently. As a teenager, was there a point at which you realised you wanted to pursue conservation for your life, for your career? What was the sort of, how did that come about?
So as I was growing up, I think wilderness was something that was always fascinating to me. So I would spend most, whenever I have free time, I would ride horse, go to the mountain, to the forest. I think that was quite fascinating and rewarding time. So it was in 2006, after my school, after I completed my school. So I was traveling to one of the very remote areas. It's called Limi. It's just next to the China border. So it is there. So I was leading a group of tourists as a local guide, showing them the trail. And I was walking ahead of the team, to look for the trails. And at the base of tall cliff, I saw two mysterious animals, which I have no idea, that turned out to be snow leopard later, but I have no idea. And I was very scared, actually. I shouted and, I tried to throw the rock at him to scare them away. And somebody from the group came running saying, snow leopard, snow leopard. So that was the first encounter. That was the live encounter I had with the animal that I have been hearing for a long time. And, and I have no idea that actually is the snow leopard, the animal that I was hearing. So from that point, I think it really sparked. That was the turning point, or that was the spark, that led me to study forestry.
Just describe what they look like for people.
It was a very beautiful creature, a small cat, right? So literally it was a cat, very small one, not that giant that I imagine, that might be something giant one. It was a beautiful creature. And it's not just about that. So I also had the opportunity to interact with the herders during the same trip. And they say they mention about frequent encounter with the snow leopard, and often they are killing livestock. So I got a chance to learn about the conflict in real scenario. So as a child, I used to hear that snow leopard kill livestock, but when I actually saw it, I also had a chance to hear the local version of the stories more in a realistic way. So I think, and that really had the influence, that really, and that was a turning point. So I was very motivated, and I was sure that, okay, now I want to go on with, continue conservation.
From that point on, you decided to work in conservation. What is the big challenge in your part of the world, in terms of what are the most endangered or at-risk species in Humla? What are the sort of, what is the sort of human-wildlife conflict? What's the most pressing challenges?
There are a few challenges, I'll just start from how I got into the conservation sector. So at that time, when I saw snow leopard, I just graduated from my school. So I was about to join the high school. In Nepal, we call it campus, right? So to study further studies. And at that time, I was really in dilemma what to study. And some people would recommend you should study forestry. Some would recommend you should study agriculture. So these were some of the very spoken topics those times. And I was quite, wildlife and wilderness were always something that fascinated me from a very young age. And that moment really helped me to study forestry. So in Nepal, most of the conservationists, they come from the forestry campus. So that helped me, clear my way to the Institute of Forestry. And so as I study, and as I learn more about the wildlife and the conservation challenges, so I face in my own regions, the natural landscape is quite highly used by local communities because of the total area. So our regions is 5,655 square kilometer. Of the total area, less than 1% is suitable for farming. So one can imagine, and vast of the region is rugged, and we still have a good pastures where we can have a big number of livestock. And these are not just the pasture for livestock. This pasture also offers very high value medicinal and aromatic plants. And in that sense, the landscape is quite dominated by human presence. Human footprint is quite dominant. And apart from that, so it's the wildlife is the people that use the same landscape, and when people go up into this landscape with their livestock, and there's a conflict with wildlife, especially with the carnivores that prey on livestock, and that is one of the problem where it starts. And in the mountains, the livestock are like capital. They are high value, especially the horse and ox.
Yeah.
And people face use saver because the this part of the region is in terms of per capita income. This part of the region, so our region is like quite low. So in that sense, a loss of livestock means a lot of financial burden for those household or for those people who face this, and they develop a negative attitude towards wildlife conservation, and that is where all the challenges starts. And apart from these carnivores, we also have issues with the other species like Himalayan black bear or macaque. They're red crops. And with the limited farmland, and if this animal keeps raiding crops, and that is also the other challenge we face. So this conflict is not specific to certain areas; it's quite widespread, And managing this conflict means managing the landscape, and that is one of the biggest challenges in terms of human resource, in terms of financial resources, in terms of education and awareness raising, and in terms of like encouraging communities' participation in conservation.
Got you. So it's the usual thing in a way of people and wildlife in close proximity. And just explain, Rinzin, how you involve local people. Maybe give me an example.
So I'm local, and my team is local. So in that sense, we call it community-led, and our philosophy, we call it leading by local. So we basically try to mobilize multiple strata of the community, from school children through school eco-club programs to the community forests, who manages the forest, who use the forest. So we call it community forest. So it's one of the very successful institutions in Nepal. And apart from that, we engage youth through youth clubs and citizen science programs. We work with herders. We work with mother groups. We work with cooperatives and cooperatives. I think so this is the diversity that provide us. Also, like we work with the spiritual leaders like monasteries and the shamans, and so because in order to bring change, one community is not enough. We have to reach out to the diversity that is out in the society, and we try to collaborate and coordinate with multiple strata, like different institutions that is out there, towards what we want to achieve.
And I mean, people listening to this will think of Nepal, and they will think of Buddhism. You spoke about Humla and growing up there. I wondered, how does sort of Buddhist philosophical influence, how does that influence your approach to conservation?
So Humla is quite diverse culturally and ethnically. So all the northern areas bordering China, we have Buddhist communities. And a little lower elevation, we have Hindu communities. So it's a mix of the religion, And in northern areas, people have more. People are mostly Buddhist. They practice the Buddhist philosophy of compassion in actions and coexistence. But it's still like the old generation, they are quite tolerant to this. But the philosophy is, when it comes to livelihood, philosophy alone is not enough. It's supportive, but it's not enough. We need to put on efforts. For example, conservation, for a long time, conservation sustained from indigenous practice based on the religious and spiritual belief of the people, and that is how they were able to protect the resources up to now. But with changing socioeconomic scenarios, the spiritual belief or the philosophy alone is not enough to protect the species.
People still need to make a livelihood.
Yeah, people still need to make livelihood, and the generation is changing. So generation, maybe young people might more believe in ecological knowledge or the species scientific knowledge than spiritual. Old generation maybe more tend towards spiritual connections to the species, or more, they might be more motivated by the religious principles. So right now we have a very diverse people. The community is quite diverse than in the past. In the past, we don't have, so there used to be no access to education, modern education. It's mostly the religious education, or people are mostly, they're quite, they have, the faith was quite dominant, I would say, in their way, and now it's changing.
That's quite interesting, though, what you're saying, that both the sort of older and younger generations might care about wildlife, but for different reasons, as you say. Yeah. Okay. And just talk me through, you work with the local community. What have you learn from the people who live closest to the land, who are out there looking after their livestock day after day? What have you learned from them?
Scientific aspect is something we learn in the university, or we learn reading papers, right? But the practical aspect, what works and what doesn't work, that is what we learn from working with the communities. So when I started my program in Humla, in my own native region, so one of the main foundation that I was using was not as a biologist, trained biologist. I was using, most of our project design was based on local knowledge. So I put myself first as a local of the region, native of the regions. So what would I do? What is affecting me, or my family, my region? That was the main question that I was considering myself when we started the program. And apart from that, the trust, the trust and the sharing of knowledge with the people that allow us, that the opportunity that brings working with the communities is, I think, is a wealth of knowledge that we can get in scientific articles, or we can get in the university. So I will give you one example. For example, we do a scientific research, right? So maybe we write a paper. So that means a lot to us, or the whoever does the research. So when we go into new areas, we go with that aspect. And when we share these things with the people, maybe they don't care, because this is something they don't value. But if we try to listen to them, what is the major problem? If we are able to communicate properly, if we are able to listen to the context and the realities working with the people, then maybe research can go much better working with them. At the same time, we also listen to them. They feel that, okay, we are listening to them. So I think it's a mix of things.
Okay, interesting. So as we're speaking right now, Rinzin, where I am in the UK and in the rest of Europe, there's a massive heat wave. And I imagine Humla has its moments as well as the climate changes. Can you just give people a sense of how global warming is affecting your part of the world?
Yeah, I think Humla is one of the mountain regions. It's facing one of the most common form of the impact. People can visualize or people can tell is the changes in precipitation patterns, the erratic weathers. People are facing more severe drought for a long time, and sometimes they are facing more rain for a long time. And in the past, snow used to be smaller for a longer time, but now heavy snowfall at once, the increase in natural disasters. I think these are some of the key terms that people often share with us in terms of, the very easy way to reflect this climate change. And the other thing is in the mountains, in our areas, snow used to be the major source of water for the farmland, because so in my part of the world, we don't have the well-designed irrigation system. So it's mostly rain-fed farming. And so we need snow throughout the winter, so that snow remains, and in the spring it melts, and there's water for the farming and for the pastures, that allows crop to grow better. But now the winters are much drier, and the snowfall shift in the spring. Sometimes we get snowfall in June, that never happened before. These are very unusual. So these are some of the incidences. And apart from that, the disaster, as I mentioned, the summer is so high, so hot. Temperature is really high, and lots of the glacier lake outburst flood are happening now. I think that is something beyond people can imagine, because they have no idea where the lakes are.
Yeah, and I mean, those can be quite dangerous, right? Because we're talking about lakes that are quite high up in elevation, and then obviously people quite often live below that.
So people are mostly at the base, because recently there was a glacier flood in the Limi Valley. So this is the northernmost valley close to China border. And there was a glacier lake outburst for around 9:30 or 10 p.m. in the evening. And it was quite huge, and people have no way, so it's quite cold, and they have to sleep without any clothes outside. Some people are running barefoot, some people are just running in the dress they were wearing on, so they were sleeping, and then a night dress, Some people are just running in night dress, and the fear, they face. And apart from that, the infrastructure damage, the farm damage is something that that comes afterwards. First is life, so it's really threatening life and properties.
Is it something that people talk about? When you talk to farmers and other people in the area, do they talk about the fact it's getting hotter and that the weather's getting more erratic?
They does. I think this is something we say, we when we speak with people, because when we explain climate change might be too vague for them. So we try to collect the information that is much easier and more frequent to them, right? So as they say, like winter is too dry. I mentioned winter is too dry, and the forest fire is becoming a problem. Like the water sources are drying out. The erratic pattern in weather that they see is also something like unexpected in the past. So there's no pattern to weather now, precipitation, and these are some of the common things there. And apart from that, like, people also mention about the increase in disease transmission livestock. So this is also the other thing they say, like because of the increase in temperature.
And you mentioned, sounds like quite a remote and rugged landscape. What are some of the sort of practical challenge you face in your day-to-day work there as a conservationist? What's it like?
There are a few things we face. The first thing is, as we said, like ruggedness and the isolated geography. The logistic is always the biggest challenge we face. And we have a very short working season in the mountain, like winter. So in winter, like maybe like most of the settlement, there is no snowfall, but in order to get to the settlement, we have to cross the passes. But these passes have snowfall, and these passes are blocked, and apart from that, like the rainy season these days, the monsoon is quite early. So we have very effective to work is like 5-6 months of the time. And this 5-6 month logistic challenges, because of the logistic challenges, apart from that, these days, people are out migrating. People are going for different ways because in the old days, it used to be subsistence economy, and people will be around the settlement for most of the time. Now, as like the market is becoming more dominant, people travel long distance. I mean, like the cross borders, city areas to make money. That is what makes the groundwork challenging again, because when we have the right season to work, because there are no people, right? Because so that is the other challenge. And other thing is coordination. So in most of the area there are no communication. So coordination is also an issue, especially with the snow leopard. So a team, like for example, one of my team leaves for the field. And they're out of reach, and
for weeks, months.
For weeks, months, and you always have thoughts, like, okay, everything is fine. I think like that is the best we can wish for.
Right.
So apart from that, I think the conservation is a very new process in the region. People are not used to this, so we are trying to explain them, and it takes time, so that is also the other challenge we have, because maybe for people, for not all, but for most of the people, maybe conservation may not be their priority. Livelihood might be their more priority, so we balancing this aspect is also quite challenging.
And you talked about the sort of uncertainty, I guess is the word, of the in that part of the world, people talking about it. How do you personally stay motivated in the face of that sort of uncertainty?
Yeah, as I mentioned, we're used to these uncertainties. I grew up, like in between, amid these uncertainties, and so the people. So I think like the first thing, the best motivation is that I shouldn't look from my side of view. For example, I'm a trained conservation biologist, right? Or maybe like I'm a conservationist. So if I have the expectation from my eye, then maybe like it's a problem, and maybe like I might have to think more often as a local, and from the community perspective. So there's a diversity in perception, there's a diversity in people's thoughts. I think we have to embrace that, and that is very important.
Got you. Okay. And you were talking earlier about the sort of Buddhist and Hindu communities there, and you were mentioned about how young people, maybe some of their thinking is informed by schooling and education. I mean, how would you say young people in Humla think about conservation? Do they see that? You talked about when you were setting out what you saw as an opportunity, as a career for you. Does maybe are more people thinking this could be a career for me? I don't know.
Yeah, so when I was growing up as a kid, we had no opportunity. I really feel this young, so we have like very young populations, this, especially the school children. I really see a huge potential on them. And I really believe we can, like really motivate them, or we can guide them in the right way. So that is the very strong belief I always carry on. And we started a school eco club program. So one of the main goal was to educate children, not just on like the basic environmental aspect, but also train them as a future leaders. Raise their interest in conservations and explain them about the process and provide the platform for them to practice the innovations and practical aspects of the work, that they are not getting opportunity from the regular school.
Okay. So you think there's more chances now for them to think this might be a career for me? Or
There is. I think like with the technology coming up now, lots of things are becoming more accessible to us. And other thing is, young children are also very passionate. They are very enthusiastic about the new topics. I think that is the beginning of any programs, and that really inspires us. When we speak to these young children, and they're very curious. And like that is what makes up, that is what gives us hope that, okay, maybe like we should work with them and they can be a very long-term or very reliable social change makers.
Okay, and on a sort of related note, I mean, what does it mean to you to be the first Nepali recipient of a Rolex Award? What's that meant to you?
I think that was the best thing that have ever happened with me. It really gave me a pathways to, so I had an idea, I had a plan for a long time that I wanted to start something. So it really gave me a breakthrough, So Rolex was that component, that helped me bring my ideas on the ground.
And why does it matter to the rest of the world that some of these species and habitats are maintained? Why is it, I care, right? But a lot of people would be like,
I think environment, we all need good environment, so not just Humla or Nepal, but everybody need a thriving environment, not just for themselves, for the ecosystem to function properly, So everyone should contribute from the one area or wherever they are. I think so the key word is environment.
What gives you hope for the future?
I think hope is something that keeps us alive, especially in my case, So I see something that is missing out. So I feel responsibility. Somebody has to, I cannot expect somebody to come in my area and protect our biodiversity or motivate people. It has to be from within us. So I really believe, this is not just the job, it's the responsibility that we should carry forward, no matter whether we get credit or not.
What can other conservationists in other parts of the world learn from the work you're doing there?
I think the easiest thing is that one should have the courage to go back and start. So, no matter the program is large or small. So we started very small. Now I think we are gaining a momentum and we are about to raise enough concerns from the people. And also we are trying to, reorganize the environmental graduates from the regions to a common cause. So this is something we are really prioritizing, and that is something we are achieving in a good pace now. So apart from that, what we are also trying to do is that the modern conservation models are too complicated for the peoples who are illiterate, who are back in the remote areas. And in this case, we have to integrate with the traditional system that they have been practicing. And we have to try to come up with a model that fits socially, economically, and culturally relevant to the region. So one of our goals that we try in our region is trying to develop a community model, which is simple enough, but can be resilient.
It feels like it does feel like you genuinely seem to see a lot of the answers in the younger generation coming through.
I think the biggest hope is, hope itself. So, hope is something that keeps us ahead, it doesn't have to be connected to some ends or some outcomes, that we expect.
Okay, well, look, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Rinzin. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Anytime. Thanks.